So I'm pleased to kick off this mini conference, or mega talk. So mine's going to be the first of 4 related talk, which is taking us on an adventure from witnessing through to implementing, and then finally with verifying secure transparency ecosystems. So there's going to be a lot of pictures that aren't of the ArmoredWitness. So this is the ArmoredWitness here, and there's also one of them here. That's what we're going to be talking about. But you're going to see a lot of other pictures that look a bit irrelevant as we go through. So before we can talk about the ArmoredWitness, we need to talk about witnessing. And before we can talk about witnessing, I think we all need to have a shared understanding of what logs are. Hopefully there's nothing on this slide that seems novel to anybody, but we're going to just go through it because it's kind of important, right? So a log provides a verifiable, globally consistent, append-only list of data. Which means obviously once data is added to the log, it can't be deleted nor can it be modified, and new data can only be added to the end of the log. So that's append only. Globally consistent means whoever comes to the log, wherever they are in the world and whoever they happen to be, sees the same list of the data in the log. And verifiable underpins all of this. That's what logs are about. But verifiables gets thrown around and it's an interesting one, right? There's a huge difference between verifiable and verified, and that difference requires a verifier to address it, and that's where witnesses come in. So witnesses, that is an anti-measure in a tree, if you believe it or not. So witnesses, a single witness can check that a log is append only. So how it does it, the first time a witness meets a log, it gets a checkpoint from the log and says, cool, I'll take note of that. It signs that checkpoint and then says, from here on out, I'm going to hold you accountable that any other checkpoint I ever sign is going to be consistent with that checkpoint. So it's going to check the append-only property. So it keeps that checkpoint safely, locally, as safely as it keeps its key material, because if that could be swapped, then it could be tricked into signing a split view. And then as time progresses, it gets hold of new checkpoints for that log, it gets hold of consistency proofs for that log, and it verifies those, ratchets forwards, and it will sign the new checkpoint. And then at that point, it can throw away the old checkpoint because the new checkpoint commits to that. So it only needs a sort of finite constant amount of space in order to witness each log. So that a single witness gives us verification of this append-only property, but the globally consistent property requires multiple witnesses. So one way of looking at it is the more witnesses that you have that have seen the same thing, well, the more you can trust that is the view, right? And you can strengthen that further with a finite pool of witnesses, and then using a quorum technique, so n of m, to guarantee that the log is globally consistent. So that's a witness, and you can see now it's verifying what we just talked about, what logs fundamentally are. But I think it's also important to talk about witnesses, what witnesses do not do, because they don't solve every problem with or every verifiable aspect of logs, right? They do not download any of the leaves from the log, so they're only concerned with the internal hashes, so the Merkle tree structure. And the append-only nature, so that they are not going to be downloading, say, firmware from your firmware transparency log and checking that that's legit firmware that's been verifiably built or anything of the sort. So in your ecosystem, you're going to need another verifier, often called an auditor or a monitor, so that you'll need that bespoke to your ecosystem, most likely, to make sure that what is in the logs is actually legit. But the witness can underpin all of this by making sure that everyone is at least seeing the same view of the log. And the other thing about witnesses, I think this was touched on earlier as well, is that witnesses, they don't provide checkpoints directly to end users. In fact, witnesses are usually kept off the addressable internet. One that avoids a whole bunch of security risks if they can't easily be accessed from any bad actor, can't just point out where they are. But also it's just a scaling point of view. Witnesses should be cheap to run. And if you're going to be a witness that monitors tens or hundreds of logs, and each of those logs has thousands or millions of clients, you can easily imagine that scaling a witness to meet the needs of all of that read traffic would become really expensive. So for that reason, we need another way to get these signed checkpoints from witnesses out into the world, and we'll talk about that later on. So that's witness. The OmniWitness is a step up from the witness. It's the name that we use for the Trust Fabric witness. So we have a witness that anybody can run that's just out there. The OmniWitness is basically that with a policy. And the policy is sort of twofold. So at one level, it says, hey, like these are the logs that it currently verifies. And there's a list of them there. I'm not going to read it, but if you see your name on there, feel proud. And the other part of the policy is explaining how people that bring up their own log today can be witnessed by the OmniWitness and how to update that configuration. So the OmniWitness can be run directly, so you can just check it out from a repository and go run it, or even better, package it up with some kind of container ecosystem like Docker. And there was a period of time where we thought, okay, this OmniWitness, this is how we're going to kickstart the witness ecosystem. And so that's what we did, and we had a number of participants running the OmniWitness. And it worked for a while, but the sort of real problem that we got with it was really about software updates or policy updates. So if a new log was added, it didn't immediately trickle down and it didn't get into everybody's running version. And what it turned into is kind of how a lot of this stuff turns into is us nagging people to update their software. And Al probably remembers this quite well, of just like, please, come on, I know we asked you last week, but can we do it again? Can you please update it because there's a new log today? And so we knew we were onto the right idea, the right sort of shape of things, but it needed a bit more work to get it to the point where this could be a sort of viable, scalable witness network that people could depend on. And so the ArmoredWitness was born, which is basically the OmniWitness with a suit of armor and packaged up in a little plug-and-play device that looks like that. So I don't want to ruin all the details about what it is, because that's why Andrea and Al are here, to ruin all those details. But the summary of it is, it's a custom chip that's living inside there, and that chip is open source. And when you get one of these, you should verify it. But if you just trust us, don't, but you could just trust us. And then you can just plug it in with power over Ethernet, and you just sort of feed it power, you feed it internet, and it will just do everything for you. So on the first boot, it's going to update itself to the latest version of the software and keep doing that periodically, so we don't have to be nagging anybody. The software that it downloads comes from a firmware transparency log, and it makes sure that any software that it runs every time it boots up is both signed and available, is committed to in a firmware transparency log. So it secures all the logs out there, but it also makes sure of securing itself, which is pretty neat. But again, Al and Andrea are going to go into more details on that. So what we have at the moment is, I think, I don't know, maybe a dozen or so, is that right, of these ArmoredWitnesses out there? 14 and a half. Let's say a dozen of those ArmoredWitnesses out there, right? And one way of looking at it is like, that's great, we've got 14 different witnesses, and depending on your threat model, you might be happy to take it on that basis. But another way of looking at it, and the more conservative, and I think, in the security space, that's a good attitude to have, is that it only counts as one. It's just one witness, really, because it's the Trust Fabric's reputation, that we're sort of staking on this, and we just have people running this on our behalf. And then you think, well, if we're only going to have one reputational unit, basically, depending on this, why have you gone to this effort of having a bunch of devices all around the world with custom hardware and all of this stuff? You could have just taken the OmniWitness and run it on a Raspberry Pi, right? Like, that would have been just as good. And that is a very good question. But luckily, I think we've got a good answer to it. Hopefully, can convince you all. One is that by having so many devices spread geographically, it means that we get good global coverage under this single reputational unit. So one way that one might imagine that a log could present a split view would be geographically. And so the more regions that we can get covered, the more likely we are to detect that happening. And the more likely it is to be detected, the less likely a log is to do it. Another important thing is it holds us accountable. If what I was doing is just running this in a Raspberry Pi in my bedroom, that'd be wicked, right? But the other thing is I could just pull the key material off there, and then I can, just for the right amount of money, I'll not say how much it is, but you can. I'll just sign other split views of things, and people wouldn't be able to tell the difference with that. But the only way we can get, I'll talk a lot more about this, but the only way we can get updates onto there is via a transparency log, and so that looking at the transparency log tells you everything that's happening on these devices, and that's like a really neat feature. Another part of it is by having a lot of people, these in the hands of a lot of people in different ecosystems who are all passionate about their logs, but might not have otherwise before, now thought about witnessing. They're now thinking about witnessing. So there's a kind of awareness part of it. And then I think the part of it that I'm the most proud of, and I think is the coolest, is because it's the right thing to do. We really obviously believe in transparency, and this is now a living example of everything that we've learned from the collective, like over a decade or whatever, that we've all been working in transparency, put together in an end-to-end firmware transparency solution where every part of it is verifiable and verified. And I think that's super cool. So that's a kind of a high-level overview of what the Armored Witness is all about. And I say we've got other speakers who are going to come in and talk more about that. Quickly now kind of going into how does it work? Rasmus talked a little bit about this earlier, about the Bastion, and so I better talk about it because he said I'd talk about it. So there's two ways that it works. There's a synchronous way and an asynchronous way. So the synchronous way, this is sort of the more modern way that we expect things to move in this direction. What happens is the witnesses on startup, they will dial into a Bastion and leave a long-lived connection open, basically, and say, hey, Bastion, if anyone comes to you and wants me, you can use this connection to find me. Meanwhile, logs are kind of doing their thing, and they want to create a new checkpoint and share that with the world. What they do is they dial into the Bastion and say, hey, here's my new checkpoint. Here's a consistency proof. Can you get me a bunch of signatures from that? And they send that out to the witnesses that are sort of secretly dialed into the Bastion. They get that information back and they send it back to the log. The log's super happy because in real time now, it's got hold of a bunch of witnessed signatures onto its checkpoint. And then users are happy because they can just dial into the log as they normally do. And now instead of just getting a checkpoint with a log signature, they get the log signature and the witness signatures on there. So the Bastion is covered by a C2SP. Yeah, I said it right. C2SP spec, and so that's all there, and other people can integrate with this on either side or write your own Bastion if that's your jam. But because we're also trying to bootstrap this and go from 0 witnesses in the world to kind of having 1 witness in the world, there's kind of this sort of legacy sort of thing going on, right? There's a lot of logs out there that don't know about witnessing and so don't know about the Bastion and aren't supporting any of that path. And so that we can kind of get those logs witnessed, this is why we have it so that the witness can also work in this asynchronous kind of mode where they basically go to the log as just normal clients of the log and say, yo, can you give me a new checkpoint, and how about a consistency proof with that? And then they do their thing locally. But then you've kind of got a problem, right? Because the log does not know about witness signatures and isn't interested in them yet. The witness is secretly hidden away in the world. So how is it going to get those checkpoints out there? Well, that's why we have the distributor, which is basically working as a way of getting these witness checkpoints out to users. So yeah, the distributor, essentially this is just a bootstrapping thing, right? If everyone moves over to Bastions, we're kind of happy to turn all of this stuff down. But what the distributor does is just receives these checkpoints from witnesses, merges them together, much as the log was. So if 10 witnesses all come in with signed checkpoints for the same checkpoint, the distributor can serve this single checkpoint with 10 witness signatures on it, which is kind of super neat and efficient for clients. And that's basically it, right? And so if this grows and becomes more load-bearing for any reason, we'll make it a spec, but it isn't at the moment. But it is, we've got one running, the code is open source, and the API is just kind of RESTful API where you can just make simple requests to it. And there's a little thing here showing that you can just, we've got a client in the repository, which you can just kind of call into it and get some checkpoints out, and it inspects the checkpoints and the witness signatures in those checkpoints and tells you kind of how fresh they are. So to recap, before I hand over to Andrea, the Armored Witness, it's a lightweight plug-and-play device. So you get it, you plug it in, feed it internet power, and it will just take care of itself with very little effort from you. Just please keep it dry. It's the goal of this is to kickstart a diverse witness network, right? So we're going from 0 to 1, and I think that's probably the hardest change. Hopefully going from 1 to 2 and then beyond should be a lot less effort for people, and you don't need to be doing anything with custom hardware and firmware. Like, if you're happy to stake your own reputation on this, and you're prepared to run things with good OPSEC, then you can do this using, a personal computer or something. You don't need this fleet of devices that you're going to be managing. It's resistant to tampering, or at least it's very evident if we've been tampering with it and we've been putting bad firmware updates out to it. People can see that in the log. All of that stuff is verifiable, and we verify it, but we ask that other people also run verifiers for it. And again, this serves as a showcase of everything that we think good firmware transparency, and indeed just end-to-end transparency securely done, can be. All right, so that's the end of my part of the talk. If there's any questions immediately related to this, we could do them, but otherwise I'm just going to hand over to Andrea, and I think it might make sense to do questions at the end. There's always one.
How is the key managed on this witness, and when is it generated?
Yeah, Andrea is going to talk about this.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Quick one. The verifiable firmware transparency. What does it actually mean? Does it just mean checking the ledger for the entry? Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to. He asked the question. It's a good question. Luckily, we've got a good talk for it as well, so don't worry about that. Right, it seems like okay. There's one more, and we'll try our luck there and see if someone's going to ask a question that's not covered by the next talks.
So you mentioned multiple people having these devices around the world.
Yeah.
How do you distribute them? Like, how can I get one?
Yeah, Al can speak. Well, do you want to speak to Al's basically been shipping them out. I don't know if he's been taking. Yeah, he is the distributor.
If you want one of these devices, not an ArmoredWitness device, but one of these devices, you should talk to Andrea, because he will sell you one. You can turn one of those devices into something that looks a lot like the ArmoredWitness, and it would do the same job, but it won't be an ArmoredWitness because the ArmoredWitnesses are specific devices that we've provisioned and sent out to some people that have very kindly just agreed to sort of look after these devices.
Cool.
Thank you. Should I just do the arrow keys? Yes. So, thank you. Really glad to be here. So I step in to answer the question, how can I provide the best possible hardware and software framework for these fine people to develop their own firmware. So we don't have much time, so just very quick introduction about myself. I work for WithSecure, security auditors, engineers, and I'm the creator of the USB Armory, which is the originator for the modification that ended up being the ArmoredWitness. So the USB Armory is an piece of open hardware and also software that accompanies it to handle and manage the device, which was born a few years ago. This is the second version, and basically it's this tiny device here, has a USB plug, USB receptacle, and the idea is that I wanted to put a powerful system on chip in the tiniest possible form factor to use it as a really powerful, secure enclave. And so this project, the existence of these projects is also what I think gave the idea to create a modification that would be suitable for these needs, because the point of this device has always been to be transparent as possible, as verifiable as possible before even I knew about this effort. And so I think it was a very nice pairing between the work that I've done with this device and the work that is being done right now with all of this ecosystem. So the idea here is how we can build a witness that we can trust with high transparency, low touch and maintenance free. This is really important. It needs to be something where you don't need to manage updates, you don't need to manage the operating system, you don't need to have a complex supply chain for what you're gonna put on it. And that it can also demonstrate at the same time all of these principles of binary and firmware transparencies that are being promoted. So the goal of this device open hardware, open software as much as possible. Correction on the earlier talk, the chip that's on it is not a custom chip, it's a commercial chip, but that's the only thing which is a little bit opaque, and I'll talk about it, how we can mitigate that. The rest is completely open. You can download the schematics, the PCB layout. You can even rebuild it yourself if you have a fab. So it's all as open as possible. We want to reduce the attack surface as much as possible, and I explain exactly how we're going to do that, and it needs to be plug and go. You just plug it in, and it just works. So we're combining three things that I co-authored to support this project. The USB Armory itself, a framework that I call TamaGo, which is, I'm going to explain in detail what it is about, and Goti, which is a library which has been created with TamaGo for the USB Armory. So first thing first, we need to change the form factor of this device. So we transition from this piece of hardware to this one. So we basically swapped one of the USB ports with a power over Ethernet RJ45 Ethernet connection. So now in order to power this device, you just plug in a power over Ethernet cable and this device will power up and boot. So this is the first modification that was being done. The rest remains pretty much identical to the original USB Armory, which means we have an internal storage, an MMC storage of 16 gigabytes. We have an external secure element, which is unused in this specific application, but it's there. The system on chip is a pretty powerful system on chip from NXP. It's a NXP. It's a 900 megahertz Cortex A7. We have Ethernet on board with power over Ethernet, and we also have another USB port, which also is going to be important for the verification of this device. The tooling to build firmware, to fuse keys on this firmware, to verify this device, to load firmware on it is entirely open source. So even when there were tools available from NXP that were somewhat opaque or not really good, we completely re-implemented them as open source tools. So it's, except for the system on chip itself, it's as open as possible. And it's also one of the few chips where the mascaron, despite being a binary blob, it can actually be read and reverse engineered for the purpose of trying to understand as much as possible if there's any surprises in the device. There's a number of security features on the device. So first of all, there's a secure boot. So we can provision keys on the device permanently, so fuse them, so that the device can only accept firmware which is signed by the corresponding private keys. And this is important. These are not vendor fuse keys, but they can be fused by the user. So in this case, the ArmoredWitness maintainers. If you get your own device such as this, you can fuse your own keys. You're getting into an open state, and then you can lock the unit with your own keys. There's cryptographic accelerator on board, which also provide full memory encryption. So the external RAM on this device is 0.5 gigabyte of RAM. It can be completely 100% encrypted with a key that just lives on the system on chip. And this is also important for against specific tamper-proof attacks. There's a unique key per device which gets unlocked once the device is secure booted. So that's why the main key derivation happens. Each unit, once secure booted, has a unique key which is fused at the moment of the secure booting. It's random and it can be derived every time it's booted. And then we also have replay protected memory block on the MMC. So we can have an area of the internal storage which with a shared password between the system on chip. Again, we derive it from this secret, which is only unlocked when the device is secure booted. So we can do authenticated read and writes of specific regions on the MMC, and also with a protected replay counter. So this prevents rollback attacks. You cannot desolder the flash for one unit, let's say with an older firmware version, and put it back on the same unit. The system on chip will know that you're trying to execute an older version of the firmware which are not supposed to run on that device. So it prevents specific rollback attacks. Now, how do we want to put firmware on this device? So traditionally, the way we have been doing firmware on these devices, I do embedded systems auditing, so I also audit a lot of systems that are like this. In such a system, you would have your system on chip doing secure boot. It would authenticate the bootloader. Typically, it's U-boot in this kind of system. The bootloader would have another set of keys. It would need to boot Linux and authenticate Linux. Then Linux would have to derive a key using its own drivers, decrypt the file system, and then it would run your application. Now, that's a very big attack surface. There are many, many dependencies that are involved in setting up all of these chain of trust. The bootloader Linux, as we know, especially the bootloader part written in C, so languages which, as we know today, are not considered very safe in terms of security. We found many CVs, and of course, many others found many CVs on U-boot. And of course, when you need to maintain the chain of trust on an embedded device, that's the first part that you're going to attack, because the hardware will authenticate the bootloader, but if for some reason you can exploit the bootloader parsing of the Linux kernel, of the flash contents, of the signature, then if you broke the chain of trust, you can get access to this secret which is present on the system. So we want to reduce the attack surface as much as possible and reduce maintenance. If we have to maintain updates for the bootloader, for Linux, for its entire runtime, it's a very complex environment to eventually run probably a monolithic Go binary of a few thousands lines of code. And so in all my career, I realized I created this hardware, and then we were creating firmware in this way. Let's say you have a cryptocurrency wallet or any other sensitive application. You feel that even if your code is nice and elegant and secure, you are basically surrounded by a hostile environment in terms of supply chain and security. And so we wanted to kill first of all, to kill any C code from this chain of trust, and reduce the attack surface in this supply chain as much as possible. So what the TamaGo framework does, removes any runtime dependency on C code, and also removes any need for an operating system or the operating system runtime for executing Go code. And this is the framework that the ArmoredWitness is based on. And so basically what TamaGo achieves, it basically puts the Go language on the left side of this chart, because it brings it to the bare metal in the same level that C and Rust are, while maintaining 100% compatibility with the language, with the libraries, with the ecosystem as well. So that's the idea of TamaGo, to give another choice for creating firmware at the very low level. Of course, someone think there are unikernel, there are library OSs that somewhat they try to do the same thing. You have these frameworks where you can just take your application and a unikernel is created. But what these frameworks do most of the times, they just shift complexity away. They hide you from what is actually happening underneath, because at the end you're going to have a real-time operating system maybe, or some other OS which is hidden from you, and it's unsafe. It's written in C. It has even less chances of being updated. So these kind of projects, they don't meet the goals that we have in mind here. We want to completely be free of any of such dependencies. So what TamaGo is a minimally, this is important, it's a minimally patched Go distribution, because we want to achieve trust with this entire ecosystem. So it's not something that is done with spaghetti code, with a very complex reimplementation. We're talking about 5,000 lines of code, which extends the original Go support to another Go OS platform, which is called TamaGo, which can go on the ARM and RISC-V architecture and allows you execution of Go on the bare metal. And everything else is implemented just a regular Go package that you can import. Again, 5,000 lines of code. The patch is readable. It's easy to follow. If you're interested into this, in the next days I can also go through the all modifications. I think it's also a very good way to understand how the Go compiler works, but also about how the hardware works. we reuse a lot of code from existing architectures within the Go runtime. So also for all those 5,000 lines of code, the number of lines which are actually original and new are probably only the files at the bottom. So we're talking about probably less than 2,000 lines of code of completely new and fresh code which is being implemented. And so what this allows us to do is to use Go as you would use on any conventional operating system, but we're close to the bare metal. So we can write drivers in it. We can write peripheral drivers in Go because we can read and write register. We can do direct memory access with a package that we have. And you might think there are a lot of unsafe imports in all of this. It's just 3 of them, and they're very isolated and very specific. So it's also done in a way where it's also very difficult to create critical bugs in implementing this code. And the application is never ever required to use any unsafe function. So we basically transition from a layout where we would have our user space, the Go runtime running in user space. We would have the operating system. We would have the drivers in the operating system, and then we would have a bootloader. Now we don't need any of that. We just have a single Go runtime running on the bare metal, where the drivers are just libraries which are imported in your main Go application, and we also don't need a bootloader anymore because TamaGo built binaries, they can boot on themselves. They can do the hardware initialization. It's just one import. Developing, building, and running is identical to the compilation of any Go application. You use Go build, you import the board support package as you would any Go package, and then the hardware is just exposed as regular Go functions. And this also means that we maintain, and this is really important for this application, build reproducibility. So we maintain the same properties. We maintain the same Go module support. All the ecosystem is maintained. So your software bill of material for the entire software that runs on this device is in the Go mod file. So the same properties are maintained. And also what I really enjoy is the fact that I can now develop complex low-level firmware for such a device just as easily as on Linux, Windows, and macOS, because specifically the Go ecosystem makes it easy to do. And speaking of attack surface reduction, drivers written in Go using Go routines, channel, mutexes, and all of this, the line of code count is dramatically reduced in this context. So you see here the network driver, the Ethernet driver is 400 lines of code. The cryptographic accelerator driver is 840 lines of code. The MMC driver, so the flash driver, which is probably one of the most complex ones because the specifications are a nightmare, is 1,100 lines of code, and also the USB driver is pretty much the same. So we reduced a lot the attack surface of this. I know by memory when I receive a package on this device or a USB command, I can cycle in my mind of all the calls that it's going through, and that would be impossible with the Linux kernel. So now we can create true unikernels, true library OSs, and a single Go binary has everything that you need. And we eliminated C. There's not a single line of C code involved from the moment the system on chip jumps to the application, which is also the bootloader. There's not a single line of C code involved. I will demo this if you want. In these days, approach me during the break. I can show you all of this. Just one example on how we use this. My own personal smart card, this is of course all open source, is TamaGo application. So I plug in my USB Armory, and I have a smart card, an OpenPGP smart card. It's also a UTF FIDO token. And what we can do with this framework is that we can mix layers that traditionally are very hard to mix together. So I can SSH into my smart card to unlock it, instead of sending an unsafe APDU command with the pin which goes on the clear on the USB bus. And the same firmware can handle TCP/IP, SSH, but also the low-level, the PDU things. It's all in Go code. And these are things that if you try to do them in C on a regular smart card, they are impossible. If you try to do them in a real-time operating system, it's also becomes difficult. Here, it's just a matter of importing the right Go libraries. It becomes really easy. We even created a bootloader with this. So we can boot Linux with a bootloader which is written in TamaGo. So you can perform very low-level operations. Again, 700 lines of code for the bootloader. So we have the hardware. We have a framework that allows this fine gentleman to put Go code on this device. We need a third component here, which is a trusted execution environment, because this is potentially just one of the applets that can run on this hardware. So we want to have some sort of control, and to reduce the attack surface, we also want to to delegate the most complex tasks to an isolated environment. So we created a trusted execution environment entirely also with this framework, which is called GoT, which allows to supervise, to monitor applets or even operating systems such as Linux, or applets written in bare metal C, bare metal Rust, or bare metal Go, and to give them an API that allows them, for instance, to do key derivation. So the idea is that if you have more than one applet, you can derive keys which are different, which are diversified for this applet, and the applet cannot break from that execution context and derive the key that the other applet is deriving. This is traditionally on Linux, you would use OPTEE for do this kind of tasks. GoT does exactly the same thing, but completely in memory safe code. So to build the hardware witness, we combine all of these properties, and we created, first of all, a bootloader. So the only reason why we have the bootloader is because we encrypt the entire memory for the operating system and the applet. Otherwise, the bootloader part would not be needed. We cannot enable memory encryption and then proceed into our normal execution. We need to stage this approach. So the bootloader only exists to enable memory encryption and then jump to the operating system. The operating system is what supervises the applet. It has, for instance, the replay protected memory block API. It is the one that derives the key that allows authenticated read and writes with the flash memory. It has the Ethernet driver, and it handles the key derivation for the applet itself, and it supervises the applet. The TCP/IP stack, for instance, which is gvisor because it's in pure Go, lives in the applet itself. So this is a way to split the attack surface and to have the most complex attack surface in the most isolated level. So we have an API with sort of system calls between the applet and the operating system to receive and transmit Ethernet packets, but the actual TCP/IP stack lives in the applet, and the ArmoredWitness code, the ArmoredWitness code, lives in the applet itself. This also allows to update the applet in a manner separate than the operating system, and also to have signing strategies that, if you want, they could be different. You can have different keys authenticating each of these components. So in this specific case, the boot ROM is fused with the keys from this ecosystem. It authenticates the bootloader authenticates the operating system, and the operating system authenticates the applet. And from the boot ROM, so the boot ROM, of course, must use the NXP algorithms for signing and authentication, but the rest, it's all using the ecosystem for the firmware binary transparency. Both the applet and the operating system can use regular Go packages to interact with the hardware because all the drivers are written in Go. So this is, for instance, the APIs for enabling memory encryption. Again, very few calls. This is how we load an ELF image, and then we just load it to launch. Again, it's all, you go to package, go dev, and you can find these packages, and you have all the API that is needed for driver. Replay protected memory block, there's a Go functions for that. You can program the key, you can read the counter in an authenticated way, and then you can read and write the different memory blocks. So this is how the operating system basically implements these calls that are given to the applet in their API. Key derivation, so you asked this is the call for the key derivation. So we derive a key unique for each system on chip with the functionality that NXP provides for creating blob encryption keys. So this is a call that is done at initialization of the applet. The operating system takes care of deriving the keys per applet request. This is the GoT API, so we can load an execution context and we can run it. And every time the execution context, in this case, is the applet, will raise an interrupt to make a system call, or because maybe an Ethernet packet arrives, then the execution context jumps back to the operating system, which can serve this call. So there's also full interrupt support in TamaGo. So we handle interrupts like any operating system. To do RPC between the applet and the operating system, we defined an RPC interface, which basically uses in the end Go own net RPC, JSON RPC. So we just use that package, and we have system calls that allows to serialize and deserialize those calls, which I think it's a very nice way of combining something really low-level system calls, which something really convenient that Go provides. We didn't have to invent much, just pass this buffer, the length, and the rest is just done with JSON RPC. So the OS defines the functions for key derivation, checking if secure boot is enabled, or reading from the MMC, and these functions can just be called just like regular RPC calls from the applet. So it becomes really, really convenient. The trust anchor, so of course, is the boot ROM. Again, the boot ROM can be fused with your own keys, so it's not something fused with vendor-specific keys. There are no keys from WithSecure or from NXP here. And we re-implemented the library that does low-level USB communication with the device entirely in Go, so that you know exactly what's going on when the keys are being fused or when a firmware is being loaded. So in a nutshell, these devices, they can put into USB data loading mode. It means that when they're powered up, they're not running the firmware from the flash, but they're waiting for a firmware to come from USB. And this is as low level as it can get, because it's the boot ROM which enforces that protocol. The boot ROM is opaque, but we did reverse engineer it. We even had a third-party company doing an audit, so we did the best that we could to ensure that there were no surprises there. And so basically, when you're putting this device in USB serial download mode, you are so close to the metal and allows you to load your own verification firmware or to verify what is being run, and that's a trust anchor that we got. And I think Al is going to talk about also a tool that uses that. So in the presentation that will be published, you have all the links for everything. Everything is open source, the Armory, TamaGo, GoT, and of course the ArmoredWitness. In the course of today and tomorrow, please ask me any questions. I can demo these devices. I can explain as much as you like. But I have to say it's been a real privilege for us to develop this new hardware and the framework needed to make your own firmware happening. Thank you. Do I have time for questions? If there are any questions? Yes?
Okay. Why is there a specific reason you took the extra mile of making Go bare metal capable instead of just using Rust, for example, in the first place?
Yeah. So first of all, when using Rust for bare metal, you cannot use the standard library of Rust. So this means that your ecosystem is much more limited in how you're going to implement things. And this specific kind of application requires using a fairly established and complex packages. You have the Node verifier. You have many libraries which are out there, and porting them to Rust would have been a huge overhead. In this way, you can just import them right away. Second, this is not a real-time application, and so it's really convenient to have the Go ecosystem features here. It's really suited for that. And so in this end, I think the end result is better. There are no real-time concerns here, so the fact of using Go is absolutely not a problem at all. And also, this means that you can apply the same framework for transparency on what is being produced because of the build reproducibility, the fact that you're just using Go. So I think it's a really good companionship for that, and it motivates this choice.
Thank you.
Yes? I knew you had a question. You always had questions.
Hello, Andrea.
Hello.
Nice to see you again. I'm curious about the secure non-volatile storage.
Yes.
You were mentioning temper sensors for voltage, temperature, and clock.
Yes.
And my question is, where is that? Is that the SoC or is that somewhere else? And also, are those detect or react sensors and hardware? Yeah.
So the cryptographic acceleration module from NXP provides 3 or 4 different sensors for glitching, voltage, temperature, and there's an external one that we don't use. We activate those, and as soon as they're tripped, they will set the device to a non-secure state, which means that if you try to derive keys, it will just give you a default key and it will not work. And you can also act on that trigger because it raises an interrupt and you can shut down. So that's how they work. We're not having external sensors like a point of sale device would have because you want to open. But if you try to glitch the device or to drop the temperature dramatically, they will kick in.
Okay, so the sensors are in the NXP die.
Yes.
And
yes.
And they in hardware disallow access to the
Yes,
key
it's
material.
called, I think they call it dry ice technology. So
Okay.
they have internal voltage sensor and temperature sensor.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thanks. Al, can
Thank
we
you.
get you set up? Yeah. Bare metal go.
Okay. So we've gone very high, and then we've gone very, very, very low. And now I'm going to try to wendle my way in between the two. These chaps have spoken a bunch about what I was going to talk about, so we'll see how it works out. But yes, hopefully I can tell you about the firmware transparency because I'm quite excited about all of that. So as has been mentioned, everything is 100% open source. You've got the links to the repos there. There's the Apex repo listed at the bottom where you'll find all the tooling that we've spoken about. You'll find the documentation, witness IDs, configs, and all the rest of it. I think the only thing that we haven't open sourced are the secret keys. Here's the factory floor on my floor as we were building the devices. As Andrea said, everything's 100% open source. There's no U-boot, there's no Linux kernel, there's no glibc, there's no OpenSSL. Everything is 100% memory-safe language, all the way down to the mask ROM. Sadly, I couldn't change that yet, but maybe in the future. So we have our firmware repos. We need to turn them into firmware that can run on the device. So we have robots in our build pipeline doing that because we don't want any sticky human fingers anywhere near that. We have 2 pipelines. One's for our set of CI devices that triggers every time we merge a commit into main. And then we have a prod pipeline as well that happens when we tag a release on the repos. So these pipelines check out the code at the corresponding commit, do the build, do the tests, all the rest of it, and then they log the existence of this firmware into the firmware transparency logs that we run. So if we look a little bit at that, this is what we actually log. In terms of the claimant model, this is our claim statement. There's not a hell of a lot of stuff in there, and we can sort of walk through it. So there are 2 claims that are embodied in here. One of them is that this is like a release of version 0.2.1 of the applet, and the claim is that semver version corresponds to the git tag, the git hash that's in there. So git tags are mutable, which sucks. And so in order to stop ourselves from being bad people, this basically binds us to have that relationship forever. And the second claim is that if you take all of the stuff that's highlighted in orange, so we know that it's a trusted applet, so we're going to check out the applet repo at that particular git hash. We know that we've used TamaGo version, whatever it is in here, 1.22.4. And if we mix in a bunch of the stuff in the middle that I'll talk about a bit later on, then when you crank the handle, the firmware image that you get out the other end is going to have the base64 encoded SHA-256 that's there in yellow. We know that because Go reproducibility. And since this is a claim, the green line at the bottom is our signature, sort of staking our reputation on this claim being true. So just to go back, the big chunk in the middle that's sort of contained in the EMS section, this is really what's different between CI devices and production devices. So, firmware is all the same. This is really just where are my firmware transparency logs, what are the keys that I can use to authenticate stuff coming out of them, that sort of thing. So, we have our claims. Are they true? Am I making them up? Hopefully they're true, because otherwise there's quite a lot of egg to have on my face standing up at the front here. We do verify this claim as part of our build pipeline. We put the things into the log just because, let's be safe. But transparency, so don't take my word for it or our word for it. You should check for yourself. So there's a link there to a command called verify build, which Andrea hinted at earlier on. Or maybe Martin did, I can't remember now. But what this is going to do is it's going to go and look at the firmware transparency log. For every entry in the log, it's going to download that manifest that we looked at earlier on, and it's going to try to falsify that build reproducibility claim. So it's going to check out the repo at the right tag, and it's going to download the right version of TamaGo, and it's going to set all the mvars, and it's going to do the rebuild. And if it ends up with a hash that doesn't match the one that's in the claim, then we get the big red X that's in the middle there, and it will also squirrel away all the evidence from its build so that someone can look into it. On the other hand, if it does do what we said it should do, you get the nice reassuring green tick and everything continues. And so you folks can go and run this command, and I would be super happy if you did, because this is what transparency is about. This is you all holding us to account. So please do that. Right, so we've got firmware. We have claims about it. It's built. Claims appear to hold up. And so we need to provision devices, as I mentioned earlier on in response to a question. So we take one of these blank devices and we want to turn it into an armored witness. So the tool that we use to do that is creatively called provision. It's also open source, so you can go and have a look at how it works. So you can tell we're not doing anything too crazy. You basically plug in one of these devices, and then you tell it whether you want it to create a CI device or a production device, and that's just going to make it know which firmware transparency logs to go to, which keys to use. Then it's going to scrabble through that firmware transparency log and find the latest version of all the 4 different types of firmware that we have for the device, download them, do inclusion proof checking, signature verification, all of that good stuff. And then it's going to put the device into recovery mode. Andrea mentioned that earlier on, which basically turns it into a USB mass storage device that exposes all of its flash to the host. And so then we squirt the firmware onto the flash in known locations. And we also store on there what Filippo likes to call spicy signatures. So we've got our inclusion proof, which shows that the firmware manifest that is there as well is included under the checkpoint that's included. And that will become important later on. Device then boots, and if it boots successfully, then we do the secure boot fusing that Andrea was talking about earlier. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is all well and good, but what if Al just puts dodgy firmware on these devices at the factory with backdoors in, and then sends them out to the custodians? So I guess firstly, I'm disappointed that you would think that about me. It's not very nice. It's far more likely that Martin would do that sort of thing. But it is a good observation, and so I thank you for having it, because it leads nicely onto the next slide. So one of the things that we did when we sent the devices out to the various custodians, we also sent them a sort of little welcome pack, which did not include gummy bears because of export restrictions, but it did have a link to a little manual which sort of describes a bit about the device and all the rest of it and your responsibilities as a custodian. And one of them is to run another open source command, which is called verify, which does probably what you think it does. So it will, again, reset the armored witness into this recovery mode, which exposes the flash as USB mass storage. And then this verify command is going to go in there, look around at the flash. The bootloader has to be in a particular place because mask ROM, and so from there you can sort of follow the trail to figure out where the other firmwares are going to be. It pulls the firmwares off, it pulls out the spicy signature proof bundles, redoes that sort of discoverability verification, does the hashing, inclusion proof, and everything else. If it's all good, as it should be, you get green tick marks. Oh, the other thing that it does actually that's very important is that once it's done this sort of offline inclusion proof verification and hash verification, it also then goes and talks to the logs to make sure that the checkpoints that were on device are consistent with its view of the actual logs. So I can't have done anything dodgy like having a split view of our firmware transparency logs. Right, so we've got a device, we've got firmware on it, firmware has been verified, so Al couldn't have done anything naughty. Andrea sort of basically stole my slide, so this is the boot. It does some things, he told you why it does the things. Those offline proof bundles are used when we do authentication by the bootloader of the secure OS and by the authentication of the trusted applet from the OS as well. What else can I tell you about this here that he didn't say? I think he probably told you everything. I've got one thing left. So when we do updates, or when the applet rather requests an update to the operating system, the only things that can be updated are the operating system and the applet. We cannot OTA update the bootloader because mainly the bootloader is not sort of covered by firmware transparency because the mask ROM doesn't do that. And so we decided we're going to leave that one alone. And yes, and when the update does happen, we use like an A/B partition scheme. So if it goes terribly wrong, the power goes out, all that's going to happen is the device is going to reboot back into the current version of the firmware. So yeah, and well, the last piece of my puzzle was given away by Andrea as well. So we do key derivation on device. So we never get to see any of the private keys. All we can do is ask the provisioned devices to please tell us what their public keys are, and then we put them up in the Git repo so that you all can see them. Why did we do all this stuff? Well, it seemed like fun at the time, but also, in essence, all of this makes it very hard for us or anybody else to covertly tamper with these devices, which is why we're okay sort of staking our reputation on these devices. Custodians at any point can run that verify tool, not only when they first get the device, but they can do it every day after an update, every Tuesday, whatever it is they want to do. Because of that, they get to see the manifest that's on device, and they know that it's that is tied to the code because we have you all holding us to account with the code that's in the logs, which means that they can go and look at the repos, and because it's Go, they get to know the totality of the code that's running on the device. So if you have time, go in and look at it. Right? Anything looks fishy or suspicious, come and call us out, right to the paper, whatever it is you want to do. We can't ship devices with dodgy firmware on because of the verify tool. We can't do a dodgy update and try to send out bad code. Well, actually we can, but it would be really bad news because it would be quite obvious. It will be in the logs, everyone will see it, and then we'll get fired. Anybody with physical access to the device, I mean, we've tried to choose mostly responsible and nice people, but some devices go missing. Ask me about that later on. But anybody with physical access to the devices can't boot inauthentic firmware, so our security properties hold. You can't mess with it. You can't reach in while it's booted and fiddle with RAM because it's encrypted. You can't tamper with it too much because it gets upset and shouts at you. So does this mean that these devices are impenetrable and uncrackable? No, of course not. We're a little team and we did the best that we could. But it does mean that in order to have much chance of disrupting this thing, you'll probably have to get your hands on at least half of the devices. And that's one of the reasons that they're spread all around the world. And I'm not going to tell you who's got them or where they are, but it helps to sort of reinforce that. So that's all that I have.